What if the entire world was turned into a wasteland in an instant? What if civilization had collapsed completely and in its wreckage a new world emerged? What would you do if you lived in such a world? The Fallout series poses these questions in a way that most gamers can relate to. Fallout doesn't take place in a fantasy world or on another planet. It takes place in America, where everything we've ever known is gone. Remnants of a forgotten world are a reminder to the player of just how easily it can all go up in flames. It's a brave new world, one filled with terrible things. Tribes fighting for power over the population and resources. People struggling to make their way at any cost. Liars, thieves, shaky alliances. Distrust and paranoia. Uncertainty on whether or not humanity will ever thrive again. Maybe it's not such a new world after all. This is why we love Fallout. It may be a brave new world, but at least it's a beautiful one. In fact, if it weren't for the endless heaps upon heaps of utter destruction, you'd be hard-pressed not to agree with the fact that this is a world that you'd want to live in. Long removed from its glory days, a promising and technologically advanced society situated in a 1950s retro-futuristic setting, the Commonwealth is now found scattered in pieces throughout the countryside. A ravaged world lovingly referred to as the wasteland. When you see what it's all been reduced to, everything and everyone we've ever known turned to dust, it really hits you. You really feel it. And still, it's hard not to be moved by the crystal blue, pollutionless atmosphere. The remaining shell of our civilization contrasting brightly against a vivid night sky. Rolling oceans, distant mountain vistas. Was this meant to be? Was this fate? Was this natural selection? Where some games achieve greatness only visually, the Fallout series solidifies its place as one of the best games of all time with its rich story. Regardless of the title in the series, there is always an award-winning story at the heart of the Fallout franchise. It doesn't matter which edition you play, you're always going to find an endless adventure and remarkably fleshed out characters outside of those vault doors. The Fallout series is equal parts tragedy and comedy. There are some very heavy issues and concepts that are being explored in these post-apocalyptic Badlands. But at the same time, there is a gallows humor that runs through the game that's a part of its charm. For every weighty issue you have to consider, like the fate of Megaton, there is someone who has been locked in a refrigerator for 200 years. Ironic humor permeates throughout the gameplay, making commentary on consumerism and issues facing the United States past and present. But in an instant, without even looking for it, you might find a truly tragic tale, such as that of the lonely Vault-Tec rep. You meet the Vault-Tec rep in Fallout 4 during the prologue before the world has been destroyed. He's a bit annoying, but ultimately forgotten once the threat of total annihilation rears its head. Once you wake up 200 years later, the last thought on your mind is finding the rep or even knowing what became of his fate. But sometime into the game, depending on how you play or where you go, you'll run into the Vault-Tec rep again, 200 years later. I'll admit it, I laughed when I saw that he was a ghoul. Yet another great bit of dark humor by Bethesda. But then you talk to him and his story is one of betrayal and lonely wandering, much like yours. The rep explains, as you may have witnessed in the prologue, that he wasn't on the list to be placed in a vault, but he survived the bombs and became a ghoul. He witnessed all the bloodshed and violence of the world's attempt to rebuild itself. 200 years later, he's a lonely outcast with no home, friends, or even a purpose, and you can relate to that. You offer for him to stay in the settlement of Sanctuary Hills. His reaction to your kindness and his feeling of belonging will slice your heart open. This, from a character that, in your first encounter, you simply laughed at. He was comic relief. Now he's a reflection of you, and a gleaming mnemonic that we make our own meaning. It's that balance between dark humor and weightier commentaries that make Fallout such a great experience. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it never reaches GTA levels of absurd where you get pulled from the more serious elements of the game. It keeps the game interesting because you don't know what's waiting around the next corner. Yet another real beauty of Fallout, how much there is to do. In a single gameplay session wandering the Commonwealth of Fallout 4, I could have a serious conversation with Nick Valentine about what qualifies something as being intelligent and deserving of its own freedoms. I could find myself in a Lovecraftian horror story deep in the depths of Dunwich Mines, and then have a conversation with a robot who literally explodes because I keep mockingly repeating his request to comply. The Fallout series is so varied and full, to the point where the average player will never see all that these games have to offer. Even if they play through most all the quests in the game, there are so many variations on how to play them and how each story can unfold that it would take several playthroughs of the game in order to experience them all. It's incredible the amount of depth in each of these games. And because it is so varied, it encourages exploration. Because the exploration is just so fun, not because somebody told me to do it. Filling their world with interesting things to look at and interesting things to do completely outside the quests of the game is why gamers keep coming back. Some of my favorite gameplay sessions of Fallout were not mission-driven or an attempt to complete any sort of objective. They were just scavenging around the wasteland looking for nothing in particular. Every single location has a story to tell. In one of my earliest Fallout 4 sessions, I decided to roam around the Commonwealth, completely ignoring my kidnapped son because who could have predicted he would be alive 200 years later? When I found myself looking at a swan boat sitting in a pond in Boston Common. Nothing about it said danger besides all the radiation, and I could have easily gone through the entire game without ever giving it a second glance. But for some reason, I just really wanted to see what that boat had to offer. Once I entered the water, it was only seconds until I realized I had made a horrible mistake. Fallout is filled with moments like these that don't rely on the core narrative in order to occur. Sure, your average open-world AAA title these days has side quests and all sorts of things to do like collecting feathers and other silly tasks that help you fill up a completion page while getting the player to explore. But very few games do open worlds as well as Fallout. The side quests and exploration in Fallout is so good that those aspects are almost the entire reason to play the games. The main quest is of course right there, and it's your introduction to the world. But you could just as easily decide, nope, I don't care what happened to my father in the wasteland. No, I don't need to avenge my spouse 200 years later. That is incredible. There are very few games where this sort of deviation is even possible, let alone this rewarding. I get to make my own stories. I get to go on my own adventures. If I don't care about the main quest, then the main quest doesn't get done. That freedom, in addition to the rich, fleshed out worlds the Fallout series provides, makes for such a great experience. Oh yeah, and the gameplay is awesome too. I've gone this long and haven't even remotely began to discuss the core gameplay itself. The combat. Much like the freedom the narrative and environment provide in the Fallout series, the combat is just as varied. If I want to go around punching everyone in the face with my bare fists until I've become some sort of demigod who can punch a man's head off with a single hook, I can do that. If I decide that guns are not an honorable weapon and I would much rather fight my foes with a sword, I can do that. Maybe I'll take this raider camp guns blazing like an action star. Maybe I'll get on the roof of a nearby building and take them out silently with a sniper rifle. Maybe I'll program a robot to kill them for me. Maybe I won't fight them at all. Even the core concept of how combat works is varied. If you aren't into first-person shooters, play the game in third person. If you don't like shooters at all, use the VATS system and play through the game RPG style. I haven't even scratched the surface of the variation in crafting your weapons, your armor, the perk system, the special rules, companions. You don't even have to do this lonesome journey alone if you don't want to. There are interesting friends you meet along the way that you can take with you who have likes and dislikes, wants and needs. The Fallout series is a playground, albeit a playground filled with toxic waste and creatures from your nightmares, but a playground nonetheless. In each Fallout game, you are more than just an observer or one of the many people making their way in the wasteland. You are always, in all Bethesda Fallout games, vital to the future of humanity in some way. You are always an outsider, or someone new to the wasteland you inhabit. You are essentially you, someone unfamiliar with this new world that you've been thrust into. The character is an outsider because we don't live in the future of Fallout. It's as if someone gave you a crystal ball and said, here's what the world will be in 200 years. It's grounded in our reality, just in a different time. And that's what makes the core message of the Fallout series resonate far more than it would if you were thrown in as a part of the world's pre-existing structure. The story of Fallout is ultimately the story of humanity. Each game starts with the exact same phrase: war. War never changes. That single, brilliant sentence tells you everything you need to know about the message this game is sending. It doesn't matter what part of human history you were born in. The struggles and conflicts are always the same. They're just on different stages. Fallout is that rare series that tries to be something to everybody and largely succeeds. Your experience in the wastelands could be completely different than mine in almost every single way, and it's that freedom that makes these games so special. Role-playing games have been a major staple of video game culture since the beginning, but in most of these games, we don't really get to decide the role we're playing. We're a knight, or an elf, or a little boy with a baseball bat and psychic powers. It's fun to be dropped into a world and assume the role of a character in it, but when done right, it's even more fun to make the character yourself, to make the adventure yourself. Fallout isn't just one thing. Fallout is whatever you want it to be. It's a framework, a skeleton with a theme. I could go on and on about what makes this game so special, but we just don't have the time. But I will leave you with this. My favorite thing about the Fallout experience? It doesn't matter how young or old you are, where you grew up, how much money you or your parents have made. It doesn't matter what your skin color, what your sex, what your political or religious ideals. The story packed inside of this unique and profound gaming experience has a core message that we can all agree on. War. War never changes. It isn't glamorous, it isn't fun, it isn't let's light 'em up action thriller nonsense. It's devastating, it's painful, and there's a very real cost to it. Our humanity, our family, our friends, our nations, our infrastructure, our history. Fallout conveys the message so subtly but so well, by putting you right in it, by letting you feel what's truly on the line and then making you dangle from it, by transforming your character's loss and pain into your loss and pain, just like the loss and pain of any and everyone affected by war worldwide. Fallout makes you question it all, the cost and the gain, all while reinforcing the one thing that connects us all together and leaves us hopeful: our humanness, our desire to live, to love, to watch our children grow up, to leave them a world that is better than how we found it. No matter what our difference is, that is an idea we can all get behind. Those principles of honor and duty and sacrifice and right versus wrong are an altar which we can, as one, all worship at. What if the entire world was turned into a wasteland in an instant? What if civilization had collapsed completely and in its wreckage a new world emerged? What would you do if you lived in such a world? Fallout leaves the answers to those questions up to you. That is Fallout. And this is why we love it.
This is serenity. This is beauty. This is technical marvel. This is artwork. This is fast. This is slow. This is up high. This is down low. This is frustration and madness. This is shenanigans. This is story and adventure and comedic relief and violence and disgust and controversy. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. This is why we love GTA 5.